Good morning. My name is Jessica Brown. I'm a member of the First Religious Society and have spent several decades working in the field of nature conservation. We offer a warm welcome to all participating in our Earth Day service via the live stream. If you are visiting today or joining us for the first time, we are especially glad that you're with us here this morning. The pandemic is a difficult reality, yet it radiates a special call to us to cast fear aside and to love one another. It is a call to look out not only for our own safety and that of our loved ones, but also for the safety and support of all people. It is for safety that our beautiful meeting house is closed, and it is for support that we come together as a congregation and a community in this new way. Our building may be closed, but our church and our virtual arms have never been more open. If you are joining us online, there are links you can click to see today's order of service and the hymns so you can sing along. If you joined from YouTube, the links are just below the live stream in a white box. Please click on More to see them. If you are watching on the homepage, www.frsuu.org, there are buttons below the live stream. Our Earth Day service this morning has been organized by the FRS Climate Action Project, and I am pleased to welcome Brent Mitchell, who will be our guest speaker today. Brent is a longtime member of the FRS, and he's a full-time nature conservationist. He is also my husband. As Senior Vice President at the Quebec-Labrador Foundation Atlantic Center for the Environment, he conducts programs supporting all sorts of protected areas worldwide. A 5-year veteran of the Peace Corps, he is a founding partner in the U.S. National Park Service's Stewardship Institute, chair of a specialist group on privately protected areas within the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, and a consultant on UNESCO's World Heritage Program. Every Sunday, we say that it is no small thing that we have gathered. This morning, it is a particularly big thing that we have gathered, so let us give ourselves to it. I welcome one and all to our church and to our worship service. If you have a chalice or candle at home, I invite you to light it now as we enter into worship. Thank you. It is good to be together. Our call to worship comes from church member Annie Madden, and I read it on her behalf. The first Earth Day 50 years ago achieved a rare alignment, enlisting support from conservatives and liberals, rich and poor, urban dwellers and farmers, business and labor leaders. By the end of 1970, the first Earth Day led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the passage of the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Endangered Species Acts, from which we have all benefited. Today, Earth Day is widely recognized as the largest secular observance in the world, marked by more than 1 billion people every year as a day of action to change human behavior and provoke policy changes. Now, the fight for a clean environment continues with increasing urgency. With so much challenging ourselves, our families, our communities worldwide, it is good to be together for worship on this day. You are faithfully called to worship. Please join in saying the chalice lighting words while Kristen lights the chalice. The words are printed in your order of service. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. Each week, we also light 2 candles of peace, representing 2 places on earth we lift up and remember as a sacred encounter with our world. There are untold number of places on earth that need peace. These 2 we especially hold close in this service and through the week ahead. After each candle is lit, we will speak the words for peace in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. Peace, salam, shalom. This morning, we light a candle of hope and remembrance in recognition of the COVID-19 pandemic, all those who are working on the front line, all those who are struggling for their health and who have lost their lives. We will light this candle each time we worship for as long as we live into this worldwide reality. Our first candle is lit for Kivalina, Alaska, a village of 382 native people living on a peninsula reachable only by plane or boat. Its highest point is 13 feet above sea level. Climate change has warmed the ocean, which has melted the entire ice shelf that protected the land from storms and provided the hunting area for the people to feed themselves. Municipal buildings have fallen into the ocean, and now the school is about to. So far, there are no COVID-19 cases in Kivalina, but there are cases close by. Peace, salam, shalom. We light a second candle of peace for the Ghanaian villages of Gofi-Efe Toji, Forikram, and Wechau, where, as in rural communities throughout sub-Saharan Africa, villagers have limited access to clean water, either to drink or for the hand-washing measures so important to slow the spread of the coronavirus. The situation is made worse by the impacts of climate change. Now these communities, as well as urban centers like Accra, Ghana, face increasing food insecurity and hunger as the COVID-19 crisis disrupts farming activities and access to food markets. Peace, salam, shalom.
Good morning, I'm Kristen Miller, and I'm the Youth Music Director here at FRS. Please join us in singing our first hymn this morning, number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning.
Please join me in our affirmation of faith. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God.
Faith
friend Pat Skibby has made a video to share with us for our Time for All Ages today.
Hi, 50 years and 4 days ago today was the first Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970. Half a century later, we're still trying to figure out how to live on our Earth without ruining it. You all probably know that there are 7 Unitarian Universalist principles. The 7th one is respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. One of the most serious things that's going on right now on our Earth is extinction or loss of animals, many animals, large and small, because of pollution and because of climate change. The 7th UU principle says that all life is important and it's all connected. That means that even really ugly, slimy wormfish or worms that live in the middle of gross garbage piles are a vital part of the web of existence or web of life. Even greenhead flies, even mosquitoes that we don't like and we wish they'd go away, are an important part of the web of life. Even we cannot figure out how and why they're important. Today, we're going to have a question challenge for you to figure out how each of 2 sets of 4 animals, or even slimy wormfish, play their part in the web of life. I will show you pictures of 2 animals in each set. Your job is to figure out how they work together and cooperate to help each other live. I will give you about 10 seconds to think about this and see if you can figure out how they work together and come up with your answers. When you come up with your answers, it's really all right to shout it out. So here's the first picture. So we have an ostrich and a zebra. Think of how they could work together. The real answer is that zebras have excellent eyesight but very poor sense of smell, and ostriches are the other way. They have very poor eyesight but excellent sense of smell. They live together in groups and they use each other's talents to help each other. Because one has good eyesight and one has good hearing, they can alert the others when there are dangerous predators nearby. That way, they stay safer and live longer. The second set includes the slimy worms. There are 2 pictures in this set, and I'll explain why I'm showing you both of them. Here's the first one. You can see right here are the slimy worms, which are called, a little windy, which are called blue streak cleaner fish. And here you see the blue streak cleaner fish on the potato fish. Here you see the blue streak cleaner fish on the wasserfish. And this one's even more disgusting because see the little slimy worm things are going right into the gills of the fish? Think of how these help each other. And here's the real answer. The blue streak cleaner fish in both cases eat infected flesh. They eat fleas, sea fleas, they eat sea lice off these bigger fish. By doing that, they help to keep the bigger fish healthy and they get their dinner. The third set of animals is the water buffalo and the cattle egret. Take a minute and think how these 2 creatures that live together could be helping each other. And here's the real answer. The water buffalo live in Asia and India in very hot, wet climates. And what that means is there's a lot of insects that wish to live in the hair or fur of the water buffalo. The cattle egret eats insects. And cattle egrets sort of adopt a water buffalo. They don't always stay on the same one, and they don't always ride around on the back, but they often do. And they eat the lice and other little disgusting creatures like ticks that live on the water buffalo. This helps the water buffalo to stay comfortable and healthy, and again, the cattle egret gets fed. The last set of animals is the most challenging. I'm not sure any of you is going to get this, and you'll find out why. So this is a rufous woodpecker, and also in this picture, but they're too small to see, are very tiny tree ants, black tree ants. So take a minute, try to think how they could help each other. And here's the real answer, as far as we know it. But as you'll find out, we don't really know. So this is what happens. Every spring, the woodpecker lays its eggs. And it lays its eggs in the nest of the tree ants, which is especially weird because normally ants eat bird eggs, and normally the rufous woodpecker eats the black ants. But only while the eggs are sitting in the tree ready to hatch, the bird does not eat the ants, and the ants don't bother the eggs. Scientists, even now, don't really know why this is. The only thing they've been able to come up with is that once the eggs hatch and the mother bird is bringing food for the babies, that there are crumbs or bits of food that fall off and don't get into the baby birds' mouths, and the ants eat them, and so this helps the ants to live. And it gives the bird a protected place to lay its eggs and for the babies to hatch. But again, scientists don't know if that's the real reason. So all of life is important, even the little creepy creatures that we have no idea why they're important, but they all are. We're all connected to each other. Maybe during this coming week, you can yourself find a couple other examples of animals that work together.
This is the time in our service when the offering will be gratefully given and received. If you are joining us online, there is a link you can use to make your donation online. You can also text a contribution by sending the word GIVE FRS UU to the number 73256. And of course, you can always mail a check to the church as well. Half of today's unpledged cash will go to our collection for a cause for this month, which is Pennies for Poverty. For over 20 years, Pennies for Poverty has worked to reduce poverty and its impact on individuals and families in our area. It was founded with the belief that if everyone in the community does a little to help those in need, we can make a difference. There's no paid staff or related expenses. All donations go to our neighbors that need help. Every penny counts. There will now be a 4-minute period of music as you make your donations. Our reading is from The Trouble with Wilderness, a seminal essay by William Cronin that was published 25 years ago. I've chosen it because it reminds us of the importance of home as the most primary focus of our stewardship. Since we're all spending a lot of time at home these days, it seemed particularly appropriate. Wilderness gets us into trouble only if we imagine that this experience of wonder and otherness is limited to the remote corners of the planet, or that it somehow depends on pristine landscapes we ourselves do not inhabit. Nothing could be more misleading. The tree in the garden is in reality no less other, no less worthy of our wonder and respect than the tree in an ancient forest that has never known an axe or a saw, even though the tree in the forest reflects a more intricate web of ecological relationships. The tree in the garden could easily have sprung from the same seed as the tree in the forest, and we can claim only its location and perhaps its form as our own. Both trees stand apart from us. Both share our common world. The special power of the tree in the wilderness is to remind us of this fact. It can teach us to recognize the wildness we did not see in the tree we planted in our own backyard. This will happen, however, only if we abandon the dualism that sees the tree in the garden as artificial, completely fallen and unnatural, and the tree in the wilderness as natural, completely pristine and wild. Both trees, in some ultimate sense, are wild. Both, in a practical sense, now depend on our management and care. We are responsible for both, even though we can claim credit for neither. Our challenge is to stop thinking of such things according to a set of bipolar moral scales in which the human and the non-human, the unnatural and the natural, the fallen and the unfallen serve as our conceptual map for understanding and valuing the world. Instead, we need to embrace the full continuum of a natural landscape that is also cultural, in which the city, the suburb, the pastoral, and the wild each has its proper place, which we permit ourselves to celebrate without needlessly denigrating the others. We need to honor the other within and the other next door, as much as we do the exotic other that lives far away, a lesson that applies as much to people as it does to other natural things. In particular, we need to discover a common middle ground in which all of these things, from the city to the wilderness, can somehow be encompassed in the word home. Home, after all, is the place where finally we make our living. It is the place for which we take responsibility, the place we try to sustain so we can pass on what is best in it and in ourselves to our children.
Today, during our community prayer of sorrow and joy, we share many joys and sorrows that have been shared ahead of time, and we will hold space for many prayers that you may have afterward. Dick Daly and Lori Evans Daly share the joy that right in the middle of this pandemic, Lucas Gordon Evans was born on April 13th. Dick writes, "Between us, we had 19 grandchildren and now 1 great-grandchild, healthy at 6 pounds. Betsy Woodman shares, "I enjoyed the Zoom conversation post-morning worship, and there were good, positive comments about the service last week. A great idea. Thanks to all for facilitating that experience. Also loved the rainbow in this week's visuals. Love to all, and may you find beauty in the new leaves of spring." Sandra Thaxter shares that her longtime friend and sister of the heart died on Tuesday of coronavirus at a nursing home in Belmont. She worked for the last 7 years to overcome the impact of a stroke on her life. May she rest in peace. Nancy Webster shares that her father Robert died last week. Nancy was able to be with him, and we hold Nancy in our thoughts. Please hold Diane Foreman in your thoughts and prayers. Diane fell and broke her wrist in 3 places. She is having surgery on Tuesday and is in good spirits. From John March, Dr. Kaduse Allen Ward passed away Saturday, April 25th at home, surrounded by his family. He served the local community for decades as a family physician. He founded holistic family practice in the 1970s and there provided his own special brand of compassionate, holistic, integrative medical care. He reveled in nature and was an accomplished photographer. Please hold him in the light. We will now share in a few moments of silence for all the prayers, joys, and sorrows of our community that remain unvoiced this morning. If you have a special joy or sorrow to share in the chat, you may do so as we hold space in this time for you. May we all always be held by this community, stretched out over such great distances, but held together by the deep connections of spirit. May it be so.
Pastoral prayer this morning is taking from lyrics by a songwriter from my native state of Illinois, Mr. John Prine. After I read his words, I will invite you into a few moments of quiet contemplation. You can gaze out the window, get mad, get madder, throw your hands in the air, say, what does it matter? But it don't do no good to get angry, so help me I know. For a heart stained in anger grows weak, grows bitter. You become your own prisoner as you watch yourself sit there wrapped up in a trap of your very own chain of sorrow. So I invite you to take a few moments to slip off your very own chain of sorrow, if only for a moment. Get comfortable where you are. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Let your outgoing breath gently push the chain of your woes and cares away. Let the chain fall away, link by link. Feel the lightness as the weight leaves you. Peace. You know, I've had rooms empty out while I was talking, but this is the first time I've started with an empty room. It's weird, but I see your faces in my mind's eye, and I sense your presence, so welcome. I did not want to give this talk. When first approached about an Earth Day service, I proposed a comparison of the early resistance to Darwin's theories of evolution with climate change denial today. Both pitted powerful, entrenched interests against irrefutable science. But the good folks of the Climate Action Project thought that you would rather hear about my work, about what I do, about me. I don't like to talk about myself, and trust me, Darwin is a lot more interesting. So I said thanks, but no thanks. Later, I had a change of heart, or rather, a transcendental inspiration. And it came right here in this sanctuary. This was back in the good old days when we could come together here physically, before some of us started getting haircuts from family members, before all of us became amateur epidemiologists. In other words, January. It was a Wednesday night, and John Burns, the president or former president of the UUA, was here talking about his new book, Conflagration, how the Transcendentalists sparked the American struggle for racial, gender, and social justice. During the question period, Jessica asked John what the Transcendentalists might have made of climate change and our other environmental issues today. Being a good historian, John would not go too far in projecting historical figures onto modern times, but I will not soon forget his answer. He said, the Transcendentalists, they would not have despaired, they would have acted. And almost immediately, I felt ashamed of myself. How could I pass up an opportunity to speak to issues that I care passionately about, and on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day? So here I am on Earth Day, which has long been more like a week, and I will use bits of my resume to talk about the health of the planet. However, I am of course aware that presently we are all consumed with issues of public health, the COVID-19 pandemic. But as the title of my sermon suggests, in my view, the great environmental crises of our day are also pandemics. There's nothing in the etymology of the word to limit its use to human health. All the great diseases of the earth affect all of us people. We just happen to be feeling the virus more acutely just now. But I promise to talk about what I do. I work mostly on protected areas. National parks may be the most familiar to you. More specifically, I work to support the people who do the protecting in protected areas, stewards of the land and sea. For example, when I first moved to the Northeast after having worked overseas for 5 years, there was only one conservation land trust in all of Eastern Canada. I'd worked briefly as a field biologist for the trustees of reservations, so we started bringing people across the border from Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Quebec, in order to try to encourage new trusts. I'm happy to report that there's now at least one trust in every province, and I can't claim direct causality, but I think we helped. Jessica and I would do similar work in parts of the Caribbean and Latin America, and then in Central and Eastern Europe, down into the Balkans. For one example, in the Czech Republic, where private land ownership was anathema for a generation, there are now 61 private land stewardship organizations caring for the land. And while much of my work is international, I feel called to help at home when I can. When Lawrence Rockefeller donated a historically significant forest to create the first and still only national park in Vermont, we were asked to help set it up, including a new institute tasked with extending conservation stewardship, quote, beyond the hills of Vermont. Now, if you were to ask people what's the greatest environmental crisis today, most would respond climate change, and rightly so. But there is another equal in threat, related but distinct, that of the dramatic loss of biodiversity, of the number and different kinds of animals and plants. Since the first Earth Day, bird populations in the United States and Canada have dropped by 29%. Worldwide, fully a third of amphibian species are threatened with extinction. 3/4 of the genetic diversity of agricultural crops has been lost. And I could go on and on. Protected areas, of course, provide habitat or homes for animals and plants. They also present natural solutions to climate mitigation and habitat displacement. Climate change and biodiversity are connected. A couple of years ago, I was on a UNESCO mission to the World Heritage Site in the Solomon Islands, a tiny island described as a natural laboratory of biodiversity. Just about 1,000 people live there, Polynesian descent, in 4 villages around the largest lake in the Pacific. But they've been fending off incursions by powerful mining and logging interests from much larger countries. All their good efforts are now imperiled by rising sea levels quite beyond their control. Governments are struggling to respond to both the climate and biodiversity crises. New targets under the Global Convention on Biological Diversity are to be set this year, and we've been involved in some of the preparations for those negotiations. By the way, there are only 4 nations in the world that are not signatories to the Biodiversity Convention. They are Andorra, South Sudan, the Vatican, and the United States of America. One of the targets we're expecting is so-called 30 by 30, 30% of the land area of the planet to be set aside somehow for nature by the year 2030. It's ambitious. We're only at about halfway right now, but it is possible. It doesn't all have to be wilderness, as we learned in the reading from Bill Cronin. And this is how we are translating our work and our experience at site, local, and national levels into global policy. So I'd like to share some big picture thoughts that derive from this work. Evidence-based decision-making should be the way the world works, but alas, it is not always. Thousands of scientists working through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have amassed more science on this issue than perhaps any in history. I don't have to cite statistics of how much the Earth is warming and ice is melting and what that means for us. You've heard that by now. The scariest thing is that it's all happening much faster than models predicted just a few years ago. And so science alone is not enough. I served for 5 years in the Peace Corps in 3 different countries and learned the hard way that simply assembling the best knowledge and tools to improve people's lives doesn't mean that they will use them. It takes a lot of education to change human behavior, and it takes smart policies and programs to make change happen. It seems to be as true at the global level as at the local level. One thing I did do in the Peace Corps was help to set up a new system of parks and reserves, mostly marine, just before big tourism hit. And it was a real lesson in seizing an opportunity at the time. One point that the Climate Action Project folks got me thinking about was the whole question of food sovereignty and security. I suspect that many of you, like my family, have developed a new appreciation for local providers of our food in this time of national disruption in national distribution and international supply chains. And there's a land conservation dimension to food sovereignty. Perhaps instructive to our so-called war on coronavirus, most of the land use and conservation policies in the United Kingdom are based on a post-World War II realization that they needed to sustain and protect their local agriculture and not be too dependent on the European continent. Now, Brexit takes it much too far, but that's another story. Today, we burn a lot of fossil fuels, moving food and goods back and forth across the face of the globe. In fact, international shipping accounts for a third more greenhouse gas emissions than air travel. Before the trade skirmish, we were shipping to China 30 million tons of raw soybeans a year and a lot of other commodities, just so they could ship us stuff like surgical masks and medical equipment that we were no longer making here. Why? Because it was cheaper. We're now seeing the true costs. History shows us that there is always opportunity in a crisis. From my own field, I've long been impressed, but that the first steps towards creating our national parks were taken at the height of the Civil War. By the way, a Unitarian minister, Thomas Starr King, was at the center of it all. The Energy Department estimates that because of reduced activity and stay-at-home requirements, greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. will decline by 7.5% this year. That's great, but consider that the Paris Accords call for us to reduce emissions by 26 to 28% from a baseline of 2005 by 2025. We need to sustain these reductions in emissions after the COVID-19 emergency has passed if we are to have any hope of keeping the planet from overheating. Will we invest in a new energy economy or return to the old? And never mind Washington, 24 governors representing over half our population have committed to meeting the Paris targets. As with COVID-19, it is the governors showing leadership, and I'm grateful for our federal system. While it is not too late to avert our environmental pandemics, it is too late to just tinker around the edges. My work in privately protected areas is all about harnessing individual initiative and commitment. We should each be doing all that we can, but right-minded individuals cannot do it all alone. Asking everyone simply to change their light bulbs isn't going to get the job done. We need structural change alongside personal commitment. Let me give you a somewhat personal example of what I mean. Our home in Newbury has a lot of deferred maintenance. Remember, I work for a small nonprofit organization. But rather than fix everything, Jessica and I decided to invest in solar panels. And our carriage barn may be falling down, but most of the year we generate all the electricity we use and then some. I'm glad we did, and Jessica deserves all the credit for getting it done. But my point is it should not have been left to us. It is flatten the curve time on climate change. Governments should be requiring such systems, at least on new construction, just as they require building standards and smoke detectors and Title IX septic systems. After describing all these challenges, I may have you wishing that I had stuck with the Darwin theme. So let me share a few thoughts that are more hopeful. We cannot destroy the earth. Sure, we can screw up the surface pretty good and make life miserable for ourselves and other species, but our big, beautiful blue marble called Earth will keep on spinning through the cosmos no matter what we do. That gives me comfort. We know how to change energy systems. I'm not one to put too much faith in technology. In my field, there's great excitement that synthetic biology may be able to bring species back from extinction. On the other hand, it could be the script to a science fiction horror movie. But when it comes to the energy revolution, technology has a very important role to play. We know how to get off of fossil fuels. We just have to commit to it. And we can summon the political will to change the drivers of our great environmental pandemics. Remember acid rain? Sulfur and nitrogen oxides from Midwest smokestacks precipitating into streams and ponds, killing loons and amphibians and fish. When we first moved to New England in the mid-'80s, it was a big concern. I remember researching a paper on acid rain's impacts on sugar maple. But thanks to RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, you don't hear much about acid rain anymore. And RGGI is a market-based system, so it should be widely replicable. We just need a RGGI on steroids for climate change. As I mentioned earlier, protected areas provide natural solutions. They protect and create carbon sinks, not only in forests, but in healthy soils, in other kinds of vegetation, even in the oceans and the coasts, so-called blue carbon. Protected areas maintain ecosystem integrity, buffer local climate, and reduce risks and impacts from extreme events such as storms, droughts, and sea level rise. Now, climate depression is a thing. A friend and colleague from the St. Lucia National Trust likes to say that we suffer from excess powerlessness. He may be right, but I remind you what John Buren said about the transcendentalists. They would not have despaired, they would have acted. Remember that our new mission statement calls us to act with courage and transform our world. I encourage you to channel your fear and concern, perhaps anger, into action in whatever way works best for you. Activism, personal commitment, local solutions, philanthropy, and certainly voting. And just now, we must defend science from the alternative facts people. Without science, we are lost. That's a big lesson from COVID-19. All the while, you must take care of yourself and your spirit. When I begin to lose faith, I get out into the nature that sustains me. One of the last points I want to make to you may be difficult to accept just now, though after writing this, I've begun to see it pop up in editorials. COVID-19 has hit us with blinding speed. The other pandemics of climate and biodiversity loss aren't at the same pace, but they are coming on strong, and they're in it for the long run. All the evidence we have suggests that, brutal as it is now, the COVID-19 pandemic will end. We don't know exactly how, we don't know exactly when, but what we do know is that when the virus is contained, the other pandemics will still be with us. I have faith that we will solve the climate crisis. I have to. But it probably won't happen in my lifetime. That's a terrible thing to contemplate, but it is the reality. The same with biodiversity. The problems are just too pervasive, systemic, and global. But we have a moral obligation to do all that we can while we can. Earth Day 50 years ago was a pivotal moment in environmental awareness and action. We are suddenly thrust into another moment of opportunity. What will we do with it? Will the economy come back, or will we push it forward? What if courage and action were to become pandemic too? What if courage and action were pandemic too? Finally, I am personally inspired by land stewards that planted trees they knew they would never see grow to maturity. And I have to have faith that all of us, doing all that we can, will be enough.
Please join in singing our closing hymn, number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath.
Tell them
Please join us in the unison benediction. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us, now and always. Friends, as John Prine sang, it's a crooked piece of time that we live in. Things get rough, things get tough, things get harder than hard. But I say to you, the things will get better, and I look forward to the day when I can see your faces here in the sanctuary for real, whenever that comes. Until then, stay safe, be well, lift up your hearts. Remember that no matter what happens, our big, beautiful blue marble will keep on spinning through the cosmos.